Network Africa. Intense gun violence in Burundi between the police and protesters kill 8 in the capital, Bujumbura. New data from the World Bank shows that less than 10% of the world population will live in extreme poverty by the end of 2015 for the first time ever, but half of that figure will be in sub-Saharan Africa. Also, UNESCO honors teachers worldwide, especially educators in conflict zones. Hello and welcome to Network Africa. I am Adeshewa Josh. News just coming in that Ethiopia's parliament has unanimously chosen Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn for another 5-year term at its first session following elections in May. The decision did not come as a surprise. The ruling coalition and its allies won all 547 parliament seats in a poll announced by some opposition parties as a sham. Now, Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi, has known no peace since President Pierre Nkurunziza's third-term bid pulled through. Many have argued the unconstitutionality of President Nkurunziza's actions. They even say it goes against the Arusha Peace Accord of 1998, signed between Jean-Baptiste Bagaza and Sylvestre Ntibangutugaya, both former presidents of Burundi. In the presence of many notable African presidents, the UN representatives, and of course, late Nelson Mandela. The perceived violation of this accord is what has angered so many Burundians. The idea that President Nkurunziza wants to continue to cling to power, and many have died. And they say more could even still die as clashes persist across the country. Well, it is hard to overlook the fact that President Nkurunziza won an overwhelming 69.4% of the votes at the July 2015 polls in an election marred by violence and a supposed boycott of the opposition. President Nkurunziza's popularity appears to be diminishing, though, as the aid-dependent country is falling out of favor with its former colonial masters and its allies. The EU ban could do more damage to the country's economy than imagined. Now, to help us understand the situation in Burundi better, I'm being joined live on the show by Donald Dea. He is the Chief Executive PAN Officer of Pan-African Lawyers Union. Thank you so much for making our time to be with us on Network Africa.
And thank you for having me.
Now, let me take you through quickly. Your union has been advocating the restoration of constitutional order in Burundi since the crisis began, of course. Now, help us understand why most people believe this issue will only be resolved if the Arusha Accord is respected.
The Arusha Accord of 2000 created the political compromise that brought peace to Burundi. Among the fruits of the Arusha Accord is the constitution, the Burundi Constitution of 2005. The Arusha Accord had a number of provisions. One of them was on term limits, which was very important, but another was also how power will be balanced and will be shared amongst the ethnic communities that make up Burundi in all institutions of governance, peace, and security. So violating the Arusha Accord literally would mean removing the very sensitive compromise that the citizens of Burundi came up with, and it would mean a return to war in Burundi.
We also understand that your union has taken this matter to court. How has that fared?
We have taken this matter to court because we are quite clear in our mind that Nkurunziza's candidature is neither legitimate nor illegal. It violates the Constitution of 2005 that was very, very clear that there will be a 2-term limit. It violates the Arusha Accord of 2000, an international agreement that had guarantors, including the African Union, including the neighboring states, and including South Africa, which under President Mandela had concluded the mediation that took place in Arusha. Now, because of that, and because the East African community seems unable to act to tell Nkurunziza that he cannot stand, that it is not in the best interests of Burundi for him to stand, we have taken the matter to the East African Court of Justice. So the matter is still pending before court. We're challenging the legality of a third term in Burundi.
Now, you are aware that Burundi is the second poorest country in the world, and now it is now laden with the EU bans. This could be the worst nightmare for this embattled country. What's the way forward now?
It is actually pretty sad that because of weak institutions in Africa, and actually because of a UN that is not strong enough, that bilateral partners of several African countries and also of the African Union feel that the only leverage they might have is aid conditionalities. We should work on that so that there are leverages other than aid conditionalities. And the problem with aid conditionalities is that even if it is well-meaning, it is usually the weak and the poor that disproportionately bear the burden of aid restrictions. The political and economic elite will anyway cannibalize the state through corruption and make sure that they and their families don't suffer. So while I sympathize with our colleagues who feel that that is the only mechanism they have to get the countries to listen, I think it is more important that in terms of having bans and so on, that they focus individual punishment on those most responsible for this crisis. In this case, President Pierre Nkurunziza and his immediate cabal, his kitchen cabinet.
But can we then ignore the fact that he won the elections earlier this year? And what is the most effective way of addressing this so-called mild democracy situation? You cannot ignore the fact that the people voted for him. Over 60% of the votes were won by Pierre Nkurunziza. So that means, in quotes, the people want him.
There are a number of things to say there. Did he win free, fair, inclusive, and participatory elections as defined by the African Union? Because the African Union has clear standards on what is free, fair, inclusive, and participatory elections, and he failed that test. The East African Community, of which Burundi is a member, and which is the closest international organization on the ground, had an election observation mission that released a report that was signed by the chair of the parliamentary committee that, of the East African Legislative Assembly that monitored the elections. That's Zain Abubakar from Kenya. And they said clearly that the conditions leading up to the elections could not in any way be defined as free, fair, inclusive, and participatory. Quite apart from that, it is also a matter of public knowledge in Burundi and in the region and to the AU that over the last 5 years, the Nkurunziza regime has snuffed out all legitimate opposition and competition to his regime. The major political parties and the major political opponents boycotted the elections. Before that, the media had been totally muzzled. There was no independent media. All the private media stations had been bombed and shut down, so there was only the national media. And not only is Burundi one of the poorest countries, it is also one of the countries with the poorest level of literacy. The average age of schooling, the average amount of schooling is 10.1 years of schooling. So I don't think that in any sense you can say that he won free, fair, legitimate elections.
So where does that leave the crisis in Burundi? Because as it is, more clashes may break out, more deaths could be recorded. Where does this leave the crisis, and what do you expect the African Union to do at this time before it totally gets out of hand?
Yes, the one thing I can say about this time, the African Union was very, very clear from very early, from 3 months before the elections. They were very clear that Nkurunziza should not stand and that elections should be postponed and that there should be a peace process facilitated by the AU using the principle of subsidiarity through the East African Community that would bring all the stakeholders on the table, not just the ruling regime, not just the ruling regime and the political opposition, but also the citizens, the faith-based movements, the civil society of Burundi, to come up with a transitional period in which they would reinstate credible institutions of governance, a credible and legitimate constitutional court, a credible and legitimate election management body, a credible and legitimate electoral role, and then free, fair, and peaceful elections would be held.
All right.
And for us, what we are calling for is for the East African community to do that which it has committed to do, have a very credible mediation process going on. Because the country has reached an impasse, the citizens are not accepting, or at least a section of the citizens are not accepting Nkurunziza. And what we'll see is a slide back to all-out war, which will affect the entire region.
Thank you so much. Donald, they are there for us. He's the Chief Executive Officer, Pan-African Lawyers Union. He joins us live from Tanzania. here on Network Africa. Before I take you on a short break, let me quickly read out to you the key fact about Burundi. The country is facing its worst turmoil since the 12-year civil war ended in 2005. Now, it has a 10.4 million population, 50 years life expectancy for a man. It is the second poorest country in the world. 85% are Hutu, 14% are Tutsis, and 300,000 people died in the civil war that ended in 2005. Coming up on Network Africa, Guinea's authority imposed overnight curfew on the second city of Nzerekore after clashes left at least one person dead.
Welcome to the Channels TV app for the Nokia Lumia phone. Click on the Channels TV icon